Pulling permits sucks, costs a lot of time, costs a lot of money. Some people don't want to do it. I'm going to give you the pros and cons of pulling permits, the gray areas, the loopholes. Here we go. I'm Ross. Been flipping houses for 15 years. Been a GC for over a decade, most of it legally. I have pulled permits in 31 municipalities across 6 different states. Let's get into this. I'm going to go through the pros and cons. I'm going to go through the way that you get pulled into having to pull permits mid-job, the costs of not pulling permits, the 6 different ways I've been caught red-handed for not pulling permits, and the trouble I got into because of it. Here we go. Let's start with the pros and cons. Okay. Obviously, I'm not not a Boy Scout here. I do, however, think that there are some really positive benefits of the permitting system and pulling permits. And I want to go over those. Okay. I don't evade permitting the whole time, but there is a line, and there is certainly the feeling of, well, I bought the property, I own it. Why do I have to do anything? I get it. Okay. But let's go through the pros. Got a lot to say about the cons. Pros. Guys, I've been around this game for a long time, and there are some freaking idiots out there. Okay, people who think they know what they're doing, and they are doing some crazy crap on job sites. I mean, dangerous stuff that is going to catch people later. These are people who are licensed contractors who you think would know, and they don't know. In fact, I would say most of the contractors that I see doing work out there would not be able to pass inspections. Not like they're trying to toe the line, like they have no freaking clue what they're doing. And permitting stops those people from muddying the name of you or other good contractors. And that is a good thing. There is a barrier to entry, which means that for people who are able to go through that barrier, there is more monetary reward for you. Okay, so barriers to entry can be a really good thing, because I know you, if you're watching this video, are willing to solve the problems necessary to get through that barrier. Awesome. That's one. Two is that without going through the permitting process, let's say that you go and do an addition. I've seen this done before. I may have done it myself before. You go and do an addition. Let's just say that you're going to, pop a little room at the end of this rental, going to add this space and make it a 3-bedroom. I'll get more rent from it. Awesome. Okay. So you just add a couple hundred square feet. It's an easy thing to do. No problem. But here is the problem. It was 1,000 square foot house. Now it's a 1,300 square foot house, which makes your house way more valuable. Like, for instance, if I went and got a refinance done, I would want to refinance it at that higher dollar value. Let's say that it's worth $200 a square foot. So at 1,000 square feet, that house is worth $200,000. But at 1,300 square feet, the extra 300 square feet, my house is now worth $260,000. Well, that's way better. I can get more refinance money based on that. Okay. But because I didn't pull permits, I cannot, on the tax records, add the 300 square foot, because the way you add the square footage is by going through the permitting process, getting your final building inspection, and then they update the tax records. Huge benefit there. And finally, when you go to sell the house, they are going to look. Most real estate agents look to see if you pulled permits. So if you've done a nice renovation, they're going to look. And if you haven't pulled those permits, a lot of times that's going to cause you problems when you go to sell it. And finally, there is a liability here. Okay. So I said in the last video in this series that the whole game is like a passing of liability. Get an engineer involved because we can pass the liability to them. This is the city doesn't want to take liability. So they're trying to make everything according to code, so that way the liability is then on the code, not on them. Same thing for you. Okay, if you have pulled permits and done everything that you are supposed to do, you have passed the liability to the city in most ways. The city signed off on it, so it's got to be good, right? Now, I'm not trying to give you legal advice here. That may play out differently in court, but you can see how that would be a good negotiating point when you're talking to somebody who's buying the house or renting the house and something happens, right? You got a lot more ground to stand on had you gone through the proper channels and had somebody else sign off on these things than just you saying it. So there's lots of positives in here. And, I'm certainly, as I said before, all about my land, my rules, baby. But I have to be open-minded here. There are some positives here. And, whatever, unless you want to get into politics, you're not going to rewrite the rules. These are the rules. And what an entrepreneur should be doing is learning the rules and learning how to best play the game inside of those rules, because breaking them doesn't really get you that far. But let's talk about the other cons other than the way you feel about it is, well, it costs a lot of time and money, any project where you have to pull permits and go through the inspection process, which we went through a simplified version of the inspection workflow, right? We had all these different inspections. That's what all that was. Well, all that stuff takes time. It takes time because you have to coordinate all these subcontractors, since you need a different mechanical, electrical, plumbing subcontractor. You got to organize the logistics of getting each one of those in there. And then they have to do the work. And then they have to call in the inspection. A lot of times they fail inspections, which is okay. That's not a negative. Okay, sometimes inspections fail, no problem. But then they got to come back there and they have to then come do the work, the punch list work that the inspector might have given them. That's why I call that portion the gauntlet, because it takes freaking forever. Okay, I expect weeks, if not months, of added time when we're talking about pulling permits. There's just a lot of extra stuff to do. That's not to say because we're cutting corners if we don't have permits. It's to say that you don't got to wait on a bunch of stuff and keep re-coordinating. Okay, so that's certainly a con. And with extra time always comes extra money. And I'll tell you, most contractors are going to charge you more when they have to go through the permitting process, because they know the same thing, that it costs a lot more money and time and bandwidth and effort. And truly, these are, consequential costs, related costs. Because of permits, these things are caused. And then there's even more than that there's this whole like can of worms that happens. And in later videos, we're going to get deep into that. But because I did this one thing, it requires me to do this next thing and this next thing. So it might take a job or a project that should have been $50,000 and make it $80,000 or $100,000. Guys, I have seen situations where a can of worms got opened up and people had to tear down whole sections of houses and rebuild them. The costs that are consequential do add up. But then there's also the real cost, the fixed cost, the actual cost of pulling permits. Like you have to pay to pull each one of these permits. It's usually some percentage of the overall cost of the project. So you estimate the cost of the project. It's going to be about $50,000, and you pay a price of a permit based upon that. And of course, you want to say the number is less, but they're not stupid up there. So if you're doing a full renovation of a house and you're like, it's going to be $6,000, they'll know, and they aren't going to allow it. So you got to at least be somewhere in the in realistic land, and your contractor is going to do it anyway until you watch the video where I show you how to pull your own permits and be your own general contractor. Okay, because of this, some people choose to evade permits. Okay, they choose to not pull them and see what happens, and that's fine until you get caught. Okay, and I have certainly been in that situation, and as we're going to talk about, it's not always that you maliciously decide that you're not going to pull permits, because I would never do that. It is that you get yourself into a project and the scope starts to expand. You find things inside the wall or whatever. And as the scope expands, it's like, oh, I didn't need to pull permits at the start, but now I'm in a situation where I do. And that's usually how these projects go about. And just so you know, different municipalities are going to be different about when you need to pull permits and when you don't. It's going to be, in your municipalities, but generally like finish items like floors and paint, tile, cabinetry, cosmetic types of things aren't going to require permits. But the MEP and framing, if you're demoing big things, that's going to start to require it. Now, people toe the line here. Now, guys, really, as we went through the pros and cons, it'd kind of be silly if you were going to demo everything, rip off all the drywall of the walls, and not get permits. Okay. If, for one, you want to make sure that things are done right. Two, you want to make sure that there's a paper trail for the work that was done when somebody asks later, or if there's a liability down the road. And three, even if you didn't care about all that stuff, the chances of you getting caught at the end and then having to rip all the drywall off to show them the work is pretty high, because I've absolutely seen this done. Had a project that I hired a different contractor on. Okay. I was not the GC on this one, hired out a GC. I go put this thing on the market, and then we get what's called red tagged. Okay. Red tag means that the city shuts it down. It was on the market. My wife's listing this thing, and she was mad at me because it got shut down on the market. Big red tag on the front door. She was doing showings. Because I come to find that these guys did not pull permits. I mean, we did like everything in that house, gutted it, new mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Sure enough, the city came in, and so I had to go pull permits then, like pull them after the fact. So you had to pay to pull the permits and pay a fine because I didn't pull them in the first place, and because they were pissed about it. And we had to rip down the drywall in most spots so we could show them the mechanical, electrical, plumbing inside of the walls and underneath the floor and all that kind of stuff. And sure enough, some of it wasn't done right. So we had to tear more stuff up to get it done right and then re-drywall. You can imagine the costs that were associated with this. Okay, that one's on me. All right, that sucks. However, this one happened to a buddy of mine. Seriously, not me, buddy of mine. Where an inspector was snooping around, snooping around, looking inside the windows because they thought work might be happening there because they had like dumpsters out front or whatever, and thought that I guess the work might be more than cosmetic because of the things that they saw in the dumpster, which is a thing that they do, and certain ones. Looking inside of the dumpster. Then they started looking inside the windows and just walked in the freaking house. The door was unlocked, I guess. They just walked into the house. The guy had added a bathroom in the basement, but it was a basement. So to do a basement, you have to cut the concrete open, plumb underneath, and then pour new concrete. Dude had to cut it all out, okay? And he actually did this right, but still had to cut it out to show the inspector. So I'll tell you this. Not that I'm condoning this sort of activity, but if you were going to do something like that, take some freaking pictures, because maybe you'll get a little bit of leniency and be able to show the pictures. But I seriously, I'm not joking around now. If you're going to do that much work where you're really covering things up, just pull the damn permit, guys. It's like the cost of not doing that is bad. So if you're in the gray area where the scope starts to expand, and then you get to the point where you're starting to have to strip off a lot of walls, a lot of drywall, and do a lot of things inside, just go down to the city and do it. It's worth it, because the alternative is not so good. Okay. So what is the punishment? Usually it's not a legal punishment. Usually it's just fines and time and money and headache and pain. And then you get put on a radar, like they'll see you as the guy that does that thing. And that's not a good place to be either. Okay. But since it's a little bit fun, let's go through. I'll tell you the 6 different ways that I've actually gotten caught doing some dumb stuff in my earlier days, of course. First one, Google Earth. I'm not kidding you. This happened on a project. It was actually in the planning and review phase, but I was saying that, I don't need to do HVAC on this one. HVAC's already been done. Don't worry about it. So I didn't want to have to pull the HVAC permit and such. And sure enough, plan reviewer sends me Google Earth photos of, hey, 5 years ago, there was no HVAC at this house. Now there's HVAC at this house. I see that you bought it within that time. Seems like you already did the HVAC. Maybe we should inspect that. Oops. Okay, next is listing photos. I told you about that one. Got the red tag. That was because they were snooping on listing photos. Angry tenants. This happened on another one of my projects. The tenants, this is hilarious, by the way. Tenants were pissed because, I don't know, some kind of dispute about whatever. But they called the city on me, said, hey, there's stuff wrong with this house and you should come inspect it. They did inspect it, and they condemned the house, a livable house with people living in it. But anyway, they condemned the house, so the people had to get kicked out, which a little bit of a backfire. But that opened up a huge can of worms. That project ended up costing me like 60 grand. And we're going to get into the can of worm thing because this is a huge part of permitting, by the way, and grandfathering. Competing agents. All right. We've had agents who are mad about our negotiating tactics that have called in the city on thinking that work was done that needed permitted, and it wasn't. Fortunately, in this case, it actually was all done right and correct, and I had proof of it and pictures and all that kind of stuff. I had pre-pictures and post-pictures, so I could prove that it was simply a cosmetic renovation. But could have got me. Drive-by inspections. So I mentioned the one where the guy was looking through the trash, which I've seen that happen multiple times. And that led them to look through the window, led them to have right to go in the house. Right. I know that some of you are going to get a little bit worked up about that. And I don't know how that plays out in court. Okay. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that it would certainly make me angry if somebody is walking through a house that I own, which has happened to me. And I have my feelings on that. But the truth is, it's not like, if you get pulled over by a cop and you're like, well, he shouldn't have pulled me over in the first place because of blah, 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 blah. I'm pretty sure once they get in the house and see you've done all kinds of work, it's still on the record and you're still going to have to deal with that. Final one here is neighborhood watchdogs. Bought this house in a neighborhood where, like, within days, a guy came, from up the hill, and he introduced himself as the patriarch of the city. Knew he was going to be a problem right from the start. Sure enough, he's looking down the hill, watching all the stuff we're doing, called the city on me. There you go. In this case, I was planning on pulling permits legitimately. But I was trying to get as far down the road as I could before pulling them because, the reasoning would get deep. But anyway, neighborhood watchdogs. Now, early in my days, I definitely was more outright about trying to evade permitting because I was terrified of it, which I know a lot of you guys probably are. And I would do things like I would get in the house. This was like a lot of times when I was working on my own on the house, but I would put like trash bags over the windows so nobody could see in because I'd heard these stories too. And I would do things like pile up the trash. I remember I would have trash bags full of, like demo debris, and I would stack them up high, and I would build false walls, temporary walls, just so I could hold them all the way up to the ceiling. And then I would order a dumpster for a Friday night, and I'd be like, hey, you got to pick this up, Saturday morning or whatever, Friday night after 5, because I knew all the inspectors would be home, pick it up the next day, and I'd stay up all night unloading those trash bags into that thing. True story. Terrified of it. Inspector goes by, hit the deck, because you're afraid that they're going to see you and they're working. This is how it starts for a lot of people. It's not as terrifying as you think. These guys, they're trying to enforce the code. Yes, there are some that are on a little bit of a power trip, but there are ways to deal with these things. We're going to, here in the next couple of videos, I'm going to go through exactly how you fight inspectors legally and professionally. But first, we need to go through grandfathering and the can of worms, because this is probably the biggest part of permitting, and truly probably the thing that separates pro real estate investors from the rest is knowing how all of these things work. Now, before we get to that, I want you guys to look in the description here. I have a link to my free For Now school community where we talk about all this kind of crap. If you got value out of this, I guarantee you'll get value out of that. Now, here's that next video that I was talking about, grandfathering and opening up the can of worms. See you guys.